week I went to a party. It was a very fancy party, much fancier than I normally go to. Lots of people had on collared shirts. Some of the women wore dresses to the party. I'm not kidding. Now, it was a lovely, elegant house. It was a very nice time. I enjoyed everybody I got to meet. And there was one gentleman in particular who I was talking to, several years older than me, maybe 20 years older than me. And he chatted with me a little bit about his playing career as a football player way back in the day. It was awesome. It was really interesting. I enjoyed listening to him, picking his brain a little bit. I see him again a little bit later on in the party, and I look at his hand. He didn't say anything, and I have no problem with this, but I look down at his hand, and there's this gigantic ring on his finger. He's got diamonds all over it, huge chunk of metal. And I get to looking a little closer, stealing glances, and I realize it's some kind of championship something ring. And so I just asked. I figure if you wear that ring, you don't mind being asked about it because it means something to you. And so I did. And he was kind enough to take it off and let me look at it and explain to me that this was his Hall of Fame ring from his Division I college where he played football and had tremendous success in the 1970s. It was really cool. I've never seen a ring like that before, let alone get to hold it. He even let me try the thing on. It made me feel very powerful. Then it made me feel very nervous, and I gave it right back to him. But I got no problem whatsoever with the reality that at some point, that dude, through hard work and character and being a good teammate and all of that, he picked up some additional titles for himself, like champion and Hall of Famer. And now those titles are a part of who he is, a part of how he's known, and I think that's awesome. Likewise, in the book of Esther, Queen Esther is picking up titles as she goes along, as she accomplishes things, as she moves from being a beautiful young lady filled with potential to being the most powerful Jewish woman we see in the entire Old Testament, nay, really the entire Bible, right? Listen to this, Esther 9:29. Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. She's the most powerful woman on planet Earth at this point, and she's using that power for the good of her people. And the truth of the matter is she wasn't going to hold on to that power much longer, because we're only a few short years away, as the book of Esther closes, from the assassination of King Xerxes, and there's a lot of chaos and a lot of turmoil after that. The historical record is going to go a little bit cold in terms of what happened to everybody in Xerxes' court, and fortunately, the next king is going to prove to be pretty sympathetic to the Jewish people as well. More on that in a future episode. But her time in this role of great power is very, very limited. Her story is really pretty short. But what did she do with that time? Well, we got the recounting of how things worked out with Haman in the previous passage. Now we know that she's written a couple of letters with Mordecai. We discussed yesterday how it's kind of difficult to tell which letter did what exactly, but I think we're able to tell the cumulative effect of these couple of letters they produced together. And then it goes on in verse 30. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes, words of goodwill and assurance. Notice that? It's perfect symmetry. We listed, and I assume it's just Esther 1:1, right? Right at the very beginning of Esther, we get all the business about the rule of King Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces. So there again, we see the beautiful, symmetrical, careful construction of this document on display. And the words that they send out in these letters are words of goodwill and assurance. So there's a pretty dark time and a pretty difficult time, but after that comes a hard-earned, deeply appreciated peace. Picking it up in verse 30. So these letters to all the Jews that Mordecai wrote and that Queen Esther wrote, they are to establish these days of Purim at their designated times as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. A couple of things here. First of all, we're clearly in the future here in the last little bit of chapter 9. And I don't know if I've made that explicitly clear enough as we've been talking, but I'm really seeing it here. All of the politics of the Xerxesian age have shaken out. Mordecai and Esther are in the rearview mirror, and people are maybe crossing over to the first generation who would have perhaps no living memory of these events. And there's an urgency, there's an occasion here, if you will, that seems to be prompting the writing of this book of Esther, and especially this bit at the end, which may have been an epilogue. Maybe most of Esther is constructed by Mordecai himself, maybe by Ezra. But it seems to me that as time is passing, there's a concern that I'm catching on the part of the author, at least the author, if this was a team writing job, as we talked about all the way back at the beginning of this series on Esther. Whoever's doing this, it seems like there's a concern that the point might be lost, or that people are maybe starting to forget. And when it comes to history and culture, and especially hard-earned lessons of history and culture, forgetfulness is always the thing you're battling, isn't it? And I think this is a very relatable moment as we sense that the author is needing to write this stuff down to communicate to this forgetful generation. It's not really a forgetful generation. They just haven't had it properly imparted to them. We can relate to that because there's a lot of things that probably you see being tried out or recommended right now that you look at and you go, whoa, 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 no, we don't want to do that. We tried that. That idea has been weighed and found wanting. It is not compatible with human nature. That is not good. We do not want to go down that road again. I'm a big fan of the civil libertarian principles of the revolutions of the 1700s and 1800s. I'm not saying those revolutions went perfectly. Revolutions tend not to. It's a lot there. It's real weird. But I love those statements that came out of it, those human rights declarations that came out of it. I think that's what in part undergirds civil society in a society where we don't all believe or think the same things. It makes it possible for us to get along with our neighbors as we have equal protection under the law for everybody, no matter what you look like or what you think or whatever. So I think this stuff's a great idea. And I constantly see people right now trying to take action against those enshrined protections. That is not a good idea. But forgetfulness happens, sister. It just happens. Time passes, lessons are lost, and some of that is a result even of social engineering and people wanting certain lessons to be lost. Maybe there were people at the time of Esther who wanted to integrate more deeply with their later Persian Empire neighbors and wanted to abandon this passé idea that the Jews had accomplished something. Maybe the political winds had changed direction, and maybe some were now thinking it was unfashionable and not a good look to be hearkening back to the age of Xerxes, and a victory in that court is a good thing. Maybe people didn't think in very pro-Xerxesian terms for a time. I don't have any idea exactly what happened, but what I can tell, or what I detect here, is an impulse that I recognize. It's one that I get where they're coming from and why they would want to preserve this memory. There's a real pressure in place, and the key take-home of the end of chapter 9 would seem to be remember these things, and there's an appropriate propping up of Esther in her full regal presentation with all of her regal titles as well. And I get the impression that the author here is trying to say it is not only okay, it is good and right and proper to celebrate these characters and what they did, and to remember it for all generations and celebrate this proudly, regardless of which way the cultural and political and social winds might blow. And who is it who the text credits with being behind this impulse to make sure forgetfulness doesn't take over, to make sure that this is preserved? Who is given credit for being responsible in large part for how this whole thing worked out and landed on its feet in the first place? It's Queen Esther. It's meant to remind the viewer of how far she's come, how much she's accomplished, and how much she had her head screwed on straight, not just in the moment, but also thinking forward toward how future generations would perceive this and remember it. She really is held out as being worthy of the title that is in front of her name. She earned it, and in the same way, that dude at the party who earned the ring deserves all the credit in the world for having earned that. And dang right, buddy, break that thing out at Christmas parties. Let it gleam and glisten. That's a great achievement. So This title is well and rightly applied right here. Break that thing out at parties, Queen Esther. You earned it. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.